Welcome this afternoon. So the story of Wausau Paper Mill, the story of Wausau putting Wausau on the map. And this is what we'll tell a little bit of that story this afternoon. So if you're familiar with the Wausau Paper Mill, Wausau Papers, Brokaw, we hope that this will bring back some memories of you this afternoon. So we start with Wausau Paper. If this is what Wausau Paper Mill created, if you've seen this ream of paper somewhere, raise your hand, because this is the main product, especially of the more recent life of the Wausau Paper Mill. A very important part of the mill, of its history, and it's something that I'm sure that you've seen and used in your printers for a long time. This was a big part of putting Wausau Paper Mill on the map, as well as putting Wausau on the map. So we'll start with what we look like. So it starts really in Brokaw, Wisconsin, up the Wisconsin River a little bit from Wausau, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But we start in Brokaw, and that junction of the Wisconsin River, because way back in 1899, there was a little bit of a note in the Chippewa paper that a big paper mill was starting to be built. And the interesting thing about this article was that the newspaper noted that the saw logs and the manufacturers are now gone, and now the new need for water power and the manufacturers that are going to be using that water power from now on. And so thus in 1899, the Brokaw, a group of people were up in Brokaw looking around, and you notice that, just sort of as a note, this was, of course, a Kaukauna Fox Valley investment to begin with. So and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it would be interesting to note that it's funny that the paper mill wasn't named the Kaukauna Group or something like that, but instead it morphed into the Wausau Paper Mill, in the light of the fact that a lot of people that were initial owners and officers of Wausau Paper Company, including N.H. Brokaw, Alexander Stewart, W.L. Edmonds, and A.E. Edmonds, were the 3 or 4 of those were from the Fox Valley. Of course, Alexander Stewart was from Wausau, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And we'll start with Alexander Stewart. Alexander Stewart was, at this point in time, in Washington, D.C. as a congressman. But of course, he was a lumber baron from day one, almost, in Wausau. He was very influential. He had a very big mill on the Wisconsin River in downtown Wausau. One of the true lumber barons, one of the true giants of the Wausau group. In 1894, he was elected to Congress. So at this time, his main place of stay was in Washington, D.C., but he had still a very important part to play with his investments in Wausau and Marathon County, and a big part of the Wausau group. So here we start with a little, and if you consider what Alexander Stewart owned, that you see the Wausau Boom Company there nestled around Brokaw. You'll see that Alexander Stewart owned the dam and the booms. The booms were those circles of earth in the Wisconsin River. That is a longer story of how Alexander Stewart came to own all that, but that's another story. But needless to say, he was involved heavily in this area of the Wisconsin River, soon to be called Brokaw. So that's why he was brought in as one of the officers of the Wausau Paper Company. And along with, and just so that you, W.L. Edmonds from the Fox Valley, major lumber baron, started to be heavily involved with paper mills in the Fox Valley. But the key person in all of this was N.H. Brokaw, who was the major stockholder in this Brokaw mill, who Brokaw was eventually named after. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But it was N.H. Brokaw, and who was a major investor here. But you notice the date, October of 1900, a year later, N.H. Brokaw passes away. So one of the major players in the Wausau paper mill died in 1900, a year after it was formed, and thus new personnel started to come into the operation of the paper mill. Walter Alexander, you see, was elected as president. Walter Alexander, vice president, was still with Alexander Stewart, and E.A. Edmonds and W. Edmonds still were involved as officers of the mill. Which gives us a chance to talk about Walter Alexander, now the new president of the mill. Of course, he was another lumber baron, and in 1900, he was a major player in the Wausau group, very influential, and continuing to be very influential with investments coming with paper mills in Rothschilds and Mosinee. Needless to say, a very important person. And now he brings the Wausau group into the real ownership of the and governance, really, of the Wausau paper mill. So that's in 1899. The investment was started, and they started to build the mill. Soon, within a year, 1900, the first products were starting to come off of the mill in Brokaw. As you notice from the article, it's going to be paper that will begin about April. For the present, the product will be shipped to Kaukauna, again because of the ownership of the Kaukauna, the Fox Valley people. The first product was the ground wood pulp coming off of the mill. Eventually, though, the paper mill would be turning out some wrapping paper, somewhat similar to the paper that was coming eventually off the Mosinee, although the Mosinee mill had craft paper. This was regular wrapping paper coming off of this mill. And the two paper machines were named the Stewart and the Alexander, both named of Alexander Stewart, one of the major fund persons for the mill. So thus the mill was starting to take a dominant place here along the Wisconsin River north of Wausau. The mill was built, started to be built, and started to play an important part in the life of not only this part of Marathon County, but in all of central Wisconsin. Just some views of the lumber gathering along the Wisconsin River in Brokaw. And eventually that it would grow throughout the rest of the century. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but this is a picture a little bit later on of the mill as it continued to grow. And you notice that, it's hard to see this, but the lumber continued to be piled up along the outer branches of the mill itself. And the city of Brokaw, the little village of Brokaw started to grow and grow and grow. And the workers, and I show this picture of the workers because, as we'll talk a little bit later, this was an important employment place for a good many people of Wausau and Marathon County, and even extending into Lincoln County. They came from all over to work at this mill in Brokaw. There was bus service from Wausau. The owners of the mill always made sure that there was an opportunity for the workers to come up from Wausau to work in the mill. And eventually, the mill continued to grow and expand, and many more products would be coming off of that mill. Many more paper machines would be added to this important mill. So again, I want to turn a little bit to this little city, this little community called Brokaw. An important part of Wausau Paper Mill was the little community of Brokaw itself. And there was a new town, the new town of Brokaw, named after, of course, N.H. Brokaw, one of the principal stockholders of the new Wausau Paper Mill. And it became a boom, and like the headline says, quite a boom for Brokaw. This article speaks to some of the new residences being built. It did become a community town. The mill company did build the houses for the workers in the little community. So this is a little bit of a timeline of the village of Brokaw. In 1903, it was incorporated. The Methodist Church came. The company built the school. Again, a sort of a company town. Waterworks comes in 1948. A very important date, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, is the company reverses itself and starts to sell the homes. 51, the library opens, a new fire station. School closes. 67, the bridge over the Wisconsin River to the west opens. Bank. And in 1978, the company store closes. And then a little bit later on, the library also closes in 1997. So in the meantime, Brokaw was pretty much a community of Wausau Paper Mills. This is their little Wausau Paper Mill store for the community. The community, like I said, the houses started to come. The company owned the houses. They built the houses for their workers. A clubhouse in Brokaw, just another block of houses in the community, and a school was built. And eventually the community started to take shape. This is perhaps a classic photo of Brokaw. A couple of things to note. You can see the trucks coming in, local lumber dealers coming in with their trucks to unload their trucks at the mill with the lumber. And also in the background, the ski jumps, an important part of what put Brokaw on the map for many years was the ski jumps that attracted national attention during the big ski jumping era of central Wisconsin. Ben did a program on ski jumping a little bit ago, so you can take a look at that for a little bit more of a history on ski jumping in Marathon County. But by then after the war, things started to change a little bit for the Wausau Paper Mill. For one thing, it had in 1948, it had new ownership. The Wausau Paper Mill was bought by D.C. Everest and his group of stockholders. D.C. Everest, of course, at this time, the main driver, the main manager, the main owner of the Marathon Paper Mill in Rockchilds, also the corporate officer for Marathon Corporation, which holdings throughout the United States. And so he became very influential at this point in time. And in 1948, he took ownership of the Wausau paper mill. Soon he handed over the ownership, or not the ownership, but the presidency and the management of the mill to David Smith. David Smith was one of D.C. Everest's colleagues in the paper industry for quite a while, and so Everest turned over the management to David Smith. This is a picture of David Smith. This is a picture of David Smith and Mr. Arvold, who would soon take over the management. Mr. Arvold, a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Engineering, he's worked its way up through the mill in Brokaw and became president in 1968, succeeding David Smith, who had passed away in 1967. So, and then after that came Richard Ratt, president of the Wausau Paper Mills, in 1977, I'm sorry, he became president of the mill. He was working with Philip Morris Corporation, and he was brought in to succeed William Arvold. Then the corporate offices moved to Clark Island, and I just wanted to talk. In 1980, the corporate offices moved to Clark Island in downtown Wausau in this facility. The management at the Wausau Paper Mills at this time took really a different path, because they really wanted to identify a little bit more with Wausau. That's why they brought their headquarters into downtown Wausau. And a lot of different mergers and acquisitions followed the move from Brokaw for their corporate offices to Clark Island in downtown Wausau. But then eventually, the sad story was that throughout that more recent history, in 2011, the announcement that the mill was to close. So that the management of Wausau Paper Mills closed the mill here in Brokaw, and of course things changed a lot for the little community of Brokaw, as well as the mill itself. That Wausau Paper, that company that put Wausau on the map went away, and for close to 100 years, it was a vital part of our community. Wausau employing a lot of people throughout the years, and we cannot, I think, tell the story of Wausau Paper Mills without telling the story of the workers. Many multi-family generations worked at Brokaw in the mill, coming from Wausau. I mean, there were fathers and sons and grandfathers, all who came to work at this mill. It provided a big part of the Wausau economy, the Marathon County economy, for a good many years. All those hundreds, at any one given time, 300 to 400 people working at the mill. And then like I said, 2011, the mill was closed, and all those workers thus ceased to be, and no longer providing that part of the economy for Wausau and Marathon County. So, the the story of Brokaw and Wausau paper mills sort of came to a close. It's at one time, it certainly did put Wausau on the map. If you use that Wausau paper, reams of those Wausau, you know that that all came from this mill, employing all those people for many years. And this was really an important part, not only of the history of the larger history of Wausau and Marathon County, but of the economy of Wausau, an important part of who we were for a good part of the 20th century. So with that, with this, we have our memory of that plant, of that city, of that community, but it tells a great story. It tells a great story of who we were for a good part of the 1900s.